Oi, oi, it's your boy, the official sports drink of pissing in the studio sink, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 20th of February, following a very understated weekend of fights. Let's say weak. Very weak weekend of fights. Not that there wasn't good stuff to be salvaged, but, don't be surprised if we don't go on forever today, because a lot of the stuff on this card was meh. There were a few that people were like, oh, it wasn't bad, because they went in with very low expectations. But we're going to talk about the UFC card, Andrade versus Blanchfield. Just check I'm getting this lass's name right, because she's hot shit now. Hold on. Yes, Blanchfield. And after that, we'll talk about Lee Wood versus Mauricio Lara, which was a great boxing match that happened over the weekend. Well worth you looking up and enjoying. And then after that, I've got a couple of questions. So we're not starved for content this week, even though the UFC is trying to make it so that we are. And then the coming weekend, we got KSW 1, Bellator, UFC, Crush, an Adrian Broner fight, so a chance to talk about Adrian Broner. Boycast is going to be maxed out with stuff to look forward to. But today, probably the hot topic is going to be Erin Blanchfield. Where does she come from? Is she legit? Does she know things? Let's find out. Erin Blanchfield, obviously famous for the UFC putting her in against Molly McCann at the height of Molly Mania, which was a really strange move because they could have played that for a while and then they gave her just a really hard matchup, which most people agreed was a pretty hard matchup when it was made, just knowing that Blanchfield was a very strong grappler. But Blanchfield ran through her like a hot knife through butter. And then they booked her to fight Tyler Santos, which was a clever scam to stop Tyler Santos having the rematch against Valentina Shevchenko, even though she'd been calling for it for months. And then Valentina Shevchenko was able to do the Dagestani thing and be like, everyone's ducking me, even though I'm the champion. But Tyler Santos pulled out because she's got ongoing beef with the UFC and various other stuff. And Jessica Andrade, who will fight anyone, anywhere, anytime, the same way, which we'll get into later, that's the problem. But, tough as nails and willing to go on a moment's notice. She stepped in and honestly made it more palatable for a lot of fans. Most people know if you're going to get a women's MMA main event, at least Jessica Andrade is going to bring it and has a great chance of finishing it. She's probably one of the best finishers in women's MMA history. And she does have that game-breaking thing. She can hit pretty hard. Very little of her success is down to her skill. I'm going to say that. It largely hinges on her toughness. Her conditioning is also pretty good, but mainly it's physical attributes. The strength and power of Jessica Andrade. Generally, she can fight in not the smartest way and still knock out most women, or hit them so hard that they don't know what they're doing. A classic example would be the Lauren Murphy fight, her most recent one a month ago, because Lauren Murphy, she was throwing punches, landing, wasn't doing anything because she doesn't have a hitting power, and Andrade has a pretty good chin. So Andrade is landing punches and hurting her, and that's just how the fight goes. Both people are landing punches, but one person's actually matter. But always chin up in the air. The punching form is hot garbage. I introduced an inside low kick for the last fight, which was something I've been calling for 30 fights. And then, a lot of her takedowns are just picking people up, which is not ideal. If you watch someone like Khabib or Islam Makhachev, both enormously strong dudes for their division, but they're not picking people up. They're not Rustam Habilov trying to suplex everyone. They're stepping around the side and just mat returning people over and over again because they can do that 100 times around. And if Khabib is getting in position to lift someone, like when he's got someone along the fence, he can't get the body lock. He goes between the legs. He hoists them very briefly to make them hop on one leg, and he sweeps the foot out. Jessica Andrade is picking people up and trying to spin them through the air and slam them WWE style. And then there's things like the guillotine against Joanne Calderwood. Joanne Calderwood came up on the underhook from half guard, kept her head a bit low, which allowed Andrade to wrap over the top and jump to her back for the guillotine. But no one good is going to jump to their back for a guillotine when you're coming up on a half guard sweep. They're going to try and stay on top. It was her bizarre chimpanzee strength that allowed her to do that. So a reasonable test for Erin Blanchfield. This is where a lot of people stumble. Even the guys like Katlyn Chikagian, who is like a forever contender in that division. She's got she was on like an 8-fight winning streak when she fought Valentina, and then she lost to Jessica Andrade. Andrade lost every second of that first fight against Rose Namajunas and then slammed her on her head. She lost basically all of the standing work against Amanda Lemos and then standing arm triangled her. She's just a freak. So it was very interesting to see how Erin Blanchfield dealt with this. And I'd say pretty well. I think a lot of people came away thinking her striking is hot shit. Personally, no. Confident, yes. Accurate a lot of the time, yes. Still a lot of the problems that like flood WMMA at every level. So she was relying on the 1-2. Fair enough, she's fighting a shorter opponent who doesn't move her head. 1-2's perfect. She was doing a lot of having both hands away from home at the same time. So she throws the jab, and then she throws the right hand without bringing the jab back. And you end up in this weird zombie-looking position. And it makes you very susceptible to getting chinned. A really famous example of it in WMMA would be Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who has a good right hand, good stiff right hand. But every time she throws it, the other hand is dangling down by her side or out in front of her, and then she doesn't bring it back in time, and then she tries to throw it again, the same right hand over and over, back to back, and gets chinned. That was what happened with her against Andrade. Blanchfield's right hand looked good. She had a little bit of pop on it, and she was landing, but she was leaving herself open quite a lot, getting hit a fair amount. Yeah, she got a good chin on her, so I was impressed by that. And then the grappling, she didn't get her down in the first round. She was trying lots and was largely unsuccessful, but then would just break away and continue striking fairly well. And in the second round, they hit the clinch. She stepped around to the side to turn Andrade slightly. Andrade was starting to pummel pummel the underhook in, and she hit the inside trip beautifully to the correct side, as Daniel Cormier always says. To the overhook side. Jesus Aguilar, who I keep using as like the example of worst fighters coming through the Contender Series. But he was doing that the other day, trying it to the underhook side and just falling to the floor underneath the guy. But Fedor used to hit it on the underhook side a lot, and Randy Couture used to hit it off the fence on the underhook side. You probably want to stay standing if you're hitting it from the underhook side. You want to use it as like a foot sweep. But she had a beautiful inside trip, landed on top of Andrade in her guard, but the legs were open, and then she just like stepped over. No shit. People on Reddit were going, "That's the smoothest guard pass I've ever seen." You're going, "What guard, mate?" She was just there with her legs open. But come to think of it, Andrade has never been a particularly strong fighter off her back. That was one of the things that Valentina Shevchenko showed. Took her down, smashed her up from side control, finished her with the elbows from the crucifix. But yes, very promising performance from Erin Blanchfield. I think a lot of people are very hot on her chances to take Valentina Shevchenko's belt now, especially because Tyler Santos had so much success grappling with Valentina Shevchenko. Certainly, looking strong in the clinch is another one because Valentina Shevchenko loves the clinch. It's a huge part of her striking game, and I don't think a lot of people realise, or I think a lot of people don't realise rather, that it is such a big part. If you watch her fights, she'll drop away from a couple of punches, and then she'll try and counter a punch, and then the next one she'll try and duck in on a clinch or duck in on a throw. She's a very low output striker and a very low output counter striker, and some of her counters are entering good clinches or entering clinches with the advantage, entering a good double underhooks clinch, getting the cinching the body lock, running straight through someone and trying to take them down immediately. She does a lot of slipping to the outside of the opponent's lead shoulder and grabbing sort of that head and arm clinch and landing a knee or attempting a trip. So if Erin Blanchfield can make the clinch a dangerous place for Valentina Shevchenko, I think that's a very interesting part of the matchup. One part I would, people are looking at her striking now and saying, damn, she outstruck Andrade, dangerous. But one of the things that really stood out to me in this fight was how much she was relying on the step-up inside low kick, which, I've said 100 times Andrade should be doing all the time. But if there's one person that doesn't really play into fighting, it's Valentina Shevchenko, because a lot of her game is standing too far away for you to feel comfortable punching and presenting that lead leg so that you kick, and then she pulls her leg back and kicks you in the leg that you've just kicked with, or she spins into a back kick or a back fist. If you watch the fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, a fighter who loves fighting in combination but couldn't comfortably because Valentina Shevchenko kept the distance, and then she keeps going for that lead leg, because it's the only thing that's out there. You keep going, okay, I'm going to have that. Step up, outside low kick, miss. And then she comes back with an annoying slappy low kick on the outside. It's never big, impressive shots, but she does leave it out there as bait. And then sometimes she'll step in and time a left straight up the centre and grab the leg and then attempt a takedown, which is a big moment out of very small, low-risk fencing for the lead leg. There are some clips of her at seminars, with male fighters having just like doing the leg leg kick chicken, basically. Not chicken, like slaps. You remember the game where you have your hands out in prayer position and you pull them away from the opponent as they try and slap you? If you move too soon, they get a free slap. They're going to televise it soon. Dana White, he wants to... you can see where that joke's going. But yeah, you can watch clips of her doing that with much bigger fighters, men and stuff. It's a timing thing and a distance thing. You present the correct distance or the incorrect distance so that your opponent feels they've only got that one shot at your leg, and you encourage them to go for it. And it's a shot that feels safe, but it does put them out of position so you can get back in on the counter, or you can set up a spin. The spin's very rarely successful for Valentina Shevchenko, but boy, do nerds love posting GIFs of them. So yeah, it's an interesting matchup. I feel for Taila Santos because she's obviously missing out on a rematch that she almost won the first one in spite of an illegal headbutt to the face, causing huge amounts of damage. But yeah, excited for Erin Blanchfield. And what is she? She's like 23 or some shit? I'm going to check. Yes, 23. Born in 1999. Fucking hell. That makes you feel old. Oh, I tell you what made me feel old. I was watching that Red Rose on Netflix, which is a BBC sort of horror series. And this is the thing with all horror stuff now. It's written, spooky, scary app. And all the technology is interconnected. So if there's a spooky app, it can be your spooky television. It can be your spooky lights in your house. And it's trying to modernize horror because Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not as scary if you've got a mobile phone. But then all the music in it, all these teenagers, they're having dance parties and stuff. And they're all dancing to like songs from the 90s club classics. And you're thinking someone wrote this who's a bit out of touch. Or maybe 90s club bangers are as good as they were back in the day. And the kids today are like, I don't need whatever shit they listen to, Chris Brown. They want the 90s club bangers. They want rhythm as a dancer. Anyway, that's that fight done. What else was good on this card? About 3 things. Jim Miller versus Alex Hernandez was very rote. Pat Wyman alert. Just the same thing over and over again. The two trading high kicks. Miller eventually trying to cross-check it, which was a good idea. Alex Hernandez not really moving laterally as much as he used to. Just does still coming on straight lines, doing the same 2 things over and over again. A bit quicker than Miller, was able to get to him. Not at the huge reach disadvantage that he normally is and height disadvantage because Jim Miller is also sawn off. Jim Miller taking a break from Deep Rock Galactic. But the excitement came in the last round when Jim Miller almost choked him. Got on his back. I think he bundled him over on a kick. Can't remember what he got him with. But yeah, got on his back, almost got the choke. And then Alexander Hernandez got out at the last minute, ended the round on top, won the decision. It was fine. Pretty incredible, though, that Jim Miller is still doing this with fairly decent young lightweights in the deepest division in MMA. He's it's like Trinaldo, except he started fighting in the UFC long before Trinaldo did. He's been fighting professionally since 2005. And the crazy stat about him, he fought Trinaldo, and he lost because Trinaldo's the best. But the crazy stat about him is, of course, that he fought at UFC 100, UFC 200, and, UFC 300 is going to be in probably a year or 2. He'll be around for it, almost guaranteed. And he had Lyme disease. He's a real inspiration, Jim Miller. Even if he's not always winning, he was on a good 3-fight winning streak going into this one. He's dropping decisions to good young lightweights. Carry on, old man. And then the only other really interesting one on this card for me was Nazim Sadikov versus Evan Elder. Sadikov out of Ray Longo's gym, or Longo Sarah Longo, in New York. And Evan Elder out of somewhere else. Elder had apparently been training specifically for southpaws, which I thought was really interesting because he was fighting orthodox, and then he switched to southpaw early in the first round and landed a really good overhand left out of southpaw. Sadikov was trying to walk him to the fence, and Elder was fighting off the fence and doing pretty well at it. Really good back and forth fight. Lovely wrestling attempts from both men and wrestling defense from the other man. The striking was really fun. Sadikov, one of those guys you look at for tempo in striking, which is something you'll see really good boxers doing. And really good kickboxers, actually. You don't pitch everything as fast as you can because then you're showing the guy how fast you can move on your very first punches. Sadikov was sort of walking him towards the fence, throwing slower strikes and then landing fast ones. And you can land slower strikes. Think of Nick Diaz, his entire career. We're saying slower, we're not saying slow. The right hook that he caught Elder with on the counter, coming off the fence in the first round that dropped Elder to his knees, really nice. And the first 2 rounds of this were fantastic. It was just unfortunate that there was a cut opened by I believe it was the knee on a blocked kick, a blocked high kick. The knee snuck through and sliced over Elder's eyebrow, right above the eye. No way around it. A lot of people saying, "Damn, that was so quick to stop it. You should have let the cut go and see how worse it, if it got any worse." I'm telling you, it would have got a lot worse because it was in about the worst spot. Anything on the underside of your eyebrow where it's just starting to become basically your eyelid skin, those are they're the ones that instantly get fights stopped. I was at Glory 8 years ago and I watched Masaki Noiri. This was when I started liking Masaki Noiri. I'd never seen him before, but I saw him against Liam Harrison, who I knew. And Harrison was doing great work against Noiri through most of the first round. Then Noiri sort of cornered him, stepped up, hit him with the knee. The knee glanced him, but it cut right underneath his eyebrow. Basically eyelid, almost on the eyeball. And the doctors just came in and waved it off. And Harrison was rightly furious because he was doing really well, and it was a tournament. But, I mean, especially in a tournament, you can get cut in a fight, be allowed to continue the fight, and then not be able to continue in the tournament because the doctor looks at it between fights and goes, "Oh no, that's fucked up. You're not going to be able," because you've got to clear someone to fight again. It's not like they're already in a fight when you do it. So many kickboxing Grand Prix have gone that way. Famously, Mark Hunt got beat by Ray Safo, but in the course of beating Mark Hunt, he got injured facially. I think it was an orbital bone, and they couldn't safely let him continue in the tournament. So Mark Hunt, as the loser, continued and won the tournament. Yeah, terrific fight. I feel for Elder because I felt like I had it. I think I had two rounds to none for him, but you could rightly have one round either way. Ray Longo said, "I got it 1-1, but who the fuck knows?" I love Ray Longo. Yeah, I was just really impressed by these lads. I must have seen Elder before, I think. I hadn't seen Sadikov before, as far as I know. Might have seen them when I was watching the Contender Series or whatever, but I don't know where they've been. But just a reminder that, 155, these guys are so good, and these guys aren't even ranked. These guys are not even top 30, probably. Oh, and then the other one that I really enjoyed was Jamal Emmers versus Hussein Askabov. And Askabov was really weird because he was 23-0. And he had 4 million followers on Instagram. And there's his Tapology photos, him posing with 2 very fake-looking belts. But he had the record that, it's basically the Habib thing, but much worse. Where Habib and Islam were built up against a lot of no-hopers and the odd good guy, and then they got to the UFC and started proving it. This guy was built up against no-hopers, and then the moment he met Jamal Emmers, he was lost. But Emmers looked fantastic here. Every time Askabov threw a big strike, Emmers would move into the clinch, hit him with like 3 good uppercuts from the collar tie, and possibly trip him. And then out in the open, Emmers was using hand fighting, double jazz hands. He was checking both of Askabov's hands and then just pitching a right hand down the center. It worked really well. Askabov looked okay for the first round, but clearly was in with someone better than he'd ever had to fight. And then as the fight progressed, he got more and more uncomfortable with that. Helps that, he finishes most of his opponents in 1 round or whatever by like flying knee or whatever he wants because they're just homeless guys that have been picked up to lose to him. I mean, I think he did a decent enough job. He looks like a good fighter who just wasn't really... Because Emmers is good. Emmers is legitimately pretty good. He had to take some time off after that Sabatini fight. But he went to the split decision with Giga Chikadze, but then so has everyone. But, he's better than someone who's just fought no one. Anything else on that card? Mostly it was bad. Actually, Mayra Bueno Silva versus Lena Landsberg. I thought she did a good job outstriking Landsberg. Made Landsberg sort of reach awkwardly to try and get into elbowing and kneeing range. Ended up on her back very briefly, and then Landsberg did the classic blunder of just standing over someone when, without threatening to hit them. And she just spun on the leg, got the knee bar. Wasn't the prettiest knee bar entry or, finish in the world, but happens more than it should. Even the Mackenzie Dern one was ugly as hell. That girl, was it Hannah Siffers, just stood over her, gawking. Like, oh no, she's inverting on my leg. A lot easier to deal with that before they invert. Once they're upside down on your leg, you've got a problem. Felipe Lins beat Ovin St. Preux because Ovin St. Preux is washed. Marcin Prachnio, fuck me. Marcin Prachnio versus William Knight. William Knight did nothing in this fight. And I've seen him be low activity in other fights. You know, that one where he scored the big counter left hook knockout. Fabio Charant, that was it. But this dude's on a 3-fight losing streak. He lost to Maxime Grishin, who's not great. He lost to Devin Clark, who really isn't great. You know, who has Devin Clark stopped? There's your answer, William Knight. And then Marcin Prachnio kept throwing low kicks. William Knight neither did anything about the low kicks nor tried to attack in return. He just stood around doing nothing. His corner was screaming at him between rounds. All I can say is cut this bum. Also hilarious listening to the commentary talking about William Knight's physique without ever addressing the fact that USADA is supposed to prevent people from looking like bodybuilders. They say like, oh, he wants to compete as a bodybuilder in his off time. Right, everything else on that card was trash. Let's talk about Lee Wood versus Mauricio Lara. Lee Wood was the WBA regular featherweight champion. Lara didn't actually have a title coming into this. He'd beaten Josh Warrington back in 2021, but hadn't got a title out of it, even though Warrington is obviously really highly regarded, or was at the time, just due to a technicality of Warrington taking some time off and being stripped of his belt. They had a rematch, ended up in the very, very rare technical draw. If you bet a technical draw on anything and you get it, you can just retire off the proceeds. But Lara was largely unknown when he fought Warrington and really put on a performance. So he earned this fight with Lee Wood. Lee Wood just beat Michael Conlan in a good fight where he got knocked down. But I really enjoyed this fight. Lee Wood was fighting long and setting up the right hand really nicely. He was fighting behind his jab, and he was sort of... he was doing that thing where it's halfway out all the time. He never had it back in his guard. It was always sort of extended towards the guy's face. And then he'd fake in with his leg and his shoulder. So the arm was never fully coiled. It was out there and he was stepping in behind it when he wanted to jab. So he could do these half jabs, and he was doing a lot of a move I really love, where you fake the jab to the head and you step in, drop your level, and you drop the jab on their body. And you don't need a ton of, you don't have to coil the arm to do it. Just dropping your weight onto it can really wind people. And when he was doing that, that was fantastic. There was a couple of really good ones where he used that to set up dropping his level and jabbing up. So as his body came down, he'd jab upwards at Lara's head, because Lara was expected to be folded in half by the body jab. And then a lot of it was just setting up a long right hand, a long right straight. If he could get Lara's hands away from his chin, he hit him with a really good one in, I think, the third or fourth round, where he cross-parried the lead hand and shot the right straight inside. Classic stuff. I think Diaz McGregor too, or Lyoto Machida all the time. He was doing a really good thing where he was... he'd drop away from Lara as Lara came in and slap him with a long, slappy left hook that didn't look like it was going to knock anyone out. But what it did was he'd sort of pivot with it, and he'd line up his right straight because he knew exactly where Lara's head was, because he'd just finished slapping him. So he was landing these really good right hands, but every time they got close, Lara opened up with both hands and would just land really well. So you had this thing where Wood was clearly superior out of range, but he wasn't getting away after his punches a lot of the time. He was also doing something that I really love seeing from... typically you see it from like accomplished amateurs, but I don't think Wood had a very long amateur career. But George Groves used to do it too, where you throw a left hook to the chest, level changing, so that you're basically throwing your left hook at chin height for you, or shoulder height, so it's at its longest, but you're throwing it to their chest. When you're throwing a left hook to the body, normally people turn the palm upwards. It comes in more like an uppercut. You're closing your elbow, but this is a really wide open, but level with your shoulder. So you're basically like boxing someone in front of you, but you've lowered your level and their chest is now what their head was. Great point scorer. Like I said, George Groves used it loads. So he was doing really nice boxing on the outside, and Lara was having a hell of a time getting in. He kept doing something that Julio Cesar Chavez used to do to try and get in. You know, he's a Mexican boxer. He's watched a lot of Julio Cesar Chavez at some point in his life. But Julio Cesar Chavez would lean heavy onto his lead leg with his hands up by his chin, and then he'd sort of crouch down, and then he'd jab up and leap forwards, and then as he landed, or as his feet landed, he'd duck again. So it's kind of a jab and dip, but you're adding an extra step because you're crouching down before you leap in. And that was sort of working for him, but he was doing it sort of to the exclusion of everything else, and Wood was able to time him. But the first knockdown was gorgeous because Lara did a beautiful jab and step at the same time. Like his hand and his foot went at exactly the same time. His hand and his foot went at exactly the same time. Didn't look like he put anything on the jab, but because it landed, it knocked Wood's head and stunned him for a split second. And as he stepped in, he ducked down, so the old jab and dip, and he came up with a left hook, right hook, and the right hook just caught Wood across the jaw, knocked him down. But that was early in the fight, and Wood looked to be running away with it by the time round 7 rolled around, and he just got caught. He was doing too much on the inside for my liking. He was obviously, you want to punish guys who want to step in, and you don't want to be running away the whole time trying to set up long straights. So he'd been looking for his left hook a lot, and he was using the uppercut left hook, which is a classic sort of dig them out of your chest combination. But in the course of that, you are stepping into range for their left hook. And he got knocked down with a left hook of Lara's, and it was a bad knockdown. He went flap, back. He hit the mat, and his head hit the mat. And he got up, and the ref said, gloves up. And always with these things, the ref will give you a lot of leeway. You can watch back a lot of stoppages or non-stoppages and go, well, he didn't really get his gloves up and walk towards the ref in time. But his corner stopped it. His corner jumped in and stopped it before they restarted the action. And there was some debate over this, but I think this was a good... Well, he had a bad knockdown against Michael Conlan, which fueled the debate further because his corner didn't throw in the towel then. But, a corner knows their fighter. They had a good look at him while he was getting up, and they decided that was best for him. And there's always this thing with fighters, because they want to go out on their shield and so on. Famously, Joe Frazier left Eddie Futch because Futch stopped the Thriller in Manila. And that's a real extreme example, because that's a one-of-a-kind fight. That was the end of a trilogy. There was no way they were going to do a fourth. It was for the world heavyweight title. It was for Frazier to win it back. It would have been like the last note on Frazier's incredible legacy. And Eddie Futch decided that the context of the match didn't matter. When he thought Frazier was done, Frazier was done. Which a lot of people hold up as really brave corner work. Especially because, afterwards he was asked about it, and he listed a load of fighters he'd seen die in the ring. I said he didn't regret it at all, even when it came out that I think Frazier was ahead on the cards at that point. But Joe Frazier famously said he was never going to talk to Eddie Futch again. He left him. I don't know if they ever talked again, but I don't think he went back to train with him ever. And that was, one of the best coaches of all time he left, because he compassionately stopped the fight. So it does always lead to beef. I believe Wilder left his last trainer to train with some randomer who he'd already beaten in the ring because they stopped the Fury fight. It's a brave thing to do as a corner, because you're stopping the fighter taking damage. You're giving them the chance to come back better next time, particularly in boxing, where what will happen with Lee Wood is he'll probably get a couple of tune-up fights, and then he'll be back in position to do something great. I always think of Kell Brook versus Gennady Golovkin. He gave Golovkin a bit of trouble in the early rounds because he's very, very fast, and Golovkin wasn't. Golovkin was deceptively fast sometimes, but Kell Brook was really fast off the mark with his punches. And as soon as it started going tits up, Kell Brook's corner threw the towel in. And, Kell Brook didn't go on to do anything that amazing afterwards, but it is saving your fighter for another day. It's just the brave thing to do, because there's a good chance they'll leave you as a trainer, so you're going to lose some... a lot of trainers don't have another big fighter, so you're going to lose a lot of income. I think it's a real test of a coach's compassion towards their fighter. But anyway, let's do a quick question and we'll get out of here for today. Dear Jack, sorry to have sent you this after your recap. There was a moment in Islam versus Volk I was hoping you could talk about. Volk was shifting and Islam stung him in the face while he was out of position, making Volk look quite silly. This happened a couple of times, actually. This looked very intentional. This has now toppled Gunnar Nelson knocking down Brandon Thatch as my favourite face punch on a shift. You and others often talk about the benefits of shifting. As I have zero understanding of striking, could you please talk about the risks in compromising your stance like that? How to avoid them, historical references, etc. Thanks from Hyotur. I think I've answered a couple of Hyotur questions on this podcast, but I think we mentioned this from time to time, but shifting is, because it's so in vogue in MMA right now, I think we do get away from what are the issues with it. And one of the reasons that I've been saying that the left hook is going to be the big killer in the coming years is because guys still are, shifting in when maybe they shouldn't shift or shifting too often. And that was one of the things with Volk versus Max when he was Southpaw and Volk versus Islam. He was very reliant on the shift, which is a big old move, and your feet have to come together, and then you have to extend into your stance. There's a lot of time when you're out of stance. And when you're out of stance, your reactions can be as good as they ever were. Getting hit out of stance does not magically make your chin worse, but it does mean there are a lot of times where guys are hit, and you don't realize how bad it was in the fight because their stance holds them up. If you've got your feet nicely spread, you get hit, you'll just sag into your knees, basically. You'll just go, whoop, and then your legs will go a little bit stiff maybe, but you'll be on balance because your feet are nicely spread and you're in position. If you get hit while you're moving and you're on one leg moving the other leg through, and you're in the process of moving your weight when you're getting hit, there's a great chance you fall down. Two great examples of this, two from the same fight, is Demetrius Johnson versus John Dodson 1. Got knocked down while shifting, I think twice, and it really, looked bad for him. In a fight where he was otherwise taking the big blows from Dodson with very little difficulty. And the other one is TJ Dillashaw versus John Dodson again. John Dodson just very good at timing people coming in, stepping back and swinging his left hand. And he used to shift back and do it too, to further encourage the guy to chase him. He'd be shifting back, swinging. And TJ Dillashaw gets knocked down by him, and there's all that stumbling, and he's holding onto the single leg, and it was classic TJ before the I was holding onto the single leg drama against Cejudo. But if you watch that fight, he's not out, but he is all over the place. His balance is all over the place because he got knocked down, and then as you're trying to stand up again, it's easy to get knocked down again. So you're starting from a bad position if you get hit while you're shifting. We can talk about how you square yourself up to shift through, and it makes a bigger target. We can talk about how, once you've committed to shifting, it's kind of like McGregor's left hand a lot of the time. Once your shoulders go in front of your hips, you don't get a choice, really. You have to now shift. So there's no, if you're watching someone box really well, there's a lot of jabbing in or faking in and then pushing off the front foot and going back. There's a lot of false entries. You're going, am I coming in? No, I'm not. Because if they lash out at you as they think you're coming in, you can push off that lead foot, fall back, throw a right hand across the top. Bob's your uncle. That going in and out is really important. With a shift, you are sort of stuck going in and in. So the moment your shoulders pass your hips, the moment your back heel is off the floor too far, you are in the shift. So not only is it a big movement, but you are locked into the second half of it. There's no faking the shift. Well, you can fake a shift, but it's quite hard to do. And you sort of open yourself up as much as you would for a shift anyway. The only ways I've seen it work well are like Dustin Poirier against Conor McGregor. I think 2, he shifts through and immediately ducks because he knows that instead of throwing the punch, because he knows that Conor McGregor is going to throw back. But it's tricky, and it's going to change on shift to shift. Because if I throw a left jab if I'm orthodox and I throw a left jab stepping with my right foot, that's punching at the same time. If I step through with my right foot and then I throw an overhand like Dustin Poirier likes to, that's those two actions they're connected, but they're not happening at the same time. So I could step through and not throw that overhand and duck instead. It's a real risky business, is what I'm saying. And you see guys getting caught, with when they're throwing lots of step-up kicks. Someone will step up the inside as they're on one leg and hit him. That's from further out. There's less risk there. You're not stepping into punching range with your head exposed. It is a case of once you're locked into a step, you are, you're taking your risk. You're biting down in your mouthpiece and you're saying, yeah, I might get dropped off this. But again, always fakes, feints, misleading the opponent, playing with their anticipation is how you make things safer. There's this thing where, particularly because of boxing's impact, where you have these incredibly fast lads working from very, very close in a lot of the time, working from just on the end of each other's jabbing range. There's this thing where the jab is the safest weapon. And in many senses it is, but it's not safe. Nothing's really safe. The way you make things safe is that you throw enough real stuff so they respect it, but you throw enough fakes that they don't bite on everything and you get the chances to get in for free. In fact, going back to the Lara Wood fight, when Lara started getting back into the fight in the 6th and 7th, was because Wood had been holding his jab out in front of Lara's face and then just extending short ones. And then he'd shoulder fake and throw the right straight. And that worked really well when Lara was sort of paralyzed on the end of his jab. But as soon as Lara started trying to throw things over the top in the 6th and 7th round, it was working because Wood was there with his lead hand extended, not with not a lot of pop on his jab, and just sort of expecting Lara to stay there as long as he kept the hand in front of his face. Fakes, feints, real punches, they only work as long as the other guy is reading and reacting to them the way that he is. If someone's behavior changes, if they just decide, if they go back to their corner and their corner says, you got to run at him, I don't care if you get jabbed, you got to notice that and adjust. And it's a lot easier, with the end of the round, because someone's going to come out running at you at the start of the next round. But it's always coming back to that thing where you'll say, like, fighting is a relationship between two people. It's not just you two hammering buttons and seeing what works. Or at least really good fighting. Cheers, Yota. Right, I will be back in a couple of days to talk about loads of stuff we've got going on this weekend. I'm actually super psyched for it. We've got some Crush. We're going to get my weeb on. I'll be wearing my Sailor Moon outfit as I break down this obscure kickboxing card. We got One with John Lineker back, so we'll be talking about body shots into headshots and shit like that. We got a UFC with a hilarious light heavyweight main event, but probably some good stuff on the card. I haven't checked it yet. We even got KSW, actually. And we got the return of Amasov in Bellator, which is a really big deal. Terrific fighter. Very underrated. Sort of been flying under the radar because he's been fighting in Ukraine recently. Because he's Ukrainian. His mum he had to go and get his title belt back from his old house, which had been bombed. Or something like that. It was crazy, crazy story. But he's very, very good, and you should watch him. But we'll be talking about all of that on the Boycast. If you want to get the Boycast, extra podcast every week, or cool articles, or whatever I'm working on, and all my articles are narrated by yours truly, so it's basically a podcast. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Nate Marquardt tuning in for a UFC card with a lesbian in the main event and getting mad about two men kissing in an advert during said event. Bless.